What happens when the world's most feared military machine collides with a ragtag band of farmers, pirates, and frontiersmen defending their home? On January 8, 1815, beneath the fog-drenched bayous of Louisiana, the impossible became reality. 7,000 Americans, most of whom had never faced professional soldiers, stood behind mud ramparts, waiting for the crimson tide of Britain's Peninsular War veterans to crash against them. The British Army had defeated Napoleon. They had burned Washington, D.C. just months before. They were unstoppable, unbreakable, invincible. Or so they believed. Before we witness how everything they knew about warfare shattered in the span of 25 brutal minutes, tell me, where in the world are you watching this from right now? And what time is it where you are? Are you watching this in the quiet hours before dawn? Or perhaps as the sun sets on another day? Because the men who fought at New Orleans had no idea if they would ever see another sunrise. The year is 1814, and America is drowning. For 2.5 years, the young republic has been locked in a desperate struggle against the British Empire, a war that most Americans never wanted and fewer believed they could win. The White House sits as a charred skeleton in Washington. The Treasury is empty. The Army is undermanned and poorly equipped. Militias desert at the first sign of real fighting. The northern states openly discuss secession. From the granite cliffs of Maine to the swamps of Georgia, one question echoes through every town square and farmhouse. How much longer can we hold on? The Treaty of Ghent, signed on Christmas Eve 1814, technically ends the war, but news travels at the speed of sailing ships. Nobody in America knows peace has been declared, and in the Gulf of Mexico, the largest British invasion force ever assembled in the Western Hemisphere is descending on New Orleans like a hammer falling on glass. The stakes could not be higher. New Orleans is not just another city, it is the gateway to the entire Mississippi River Valley, the economic jugular of the young nation. Whoever controls New Orleans controls the heartland of America. 50,000 British troops, fresh from crushing Napoleon's armies in Europe, are coming to take it. At their head is Major General Sir Edward Pakenham, the Duke of Wellington's own brother-in-law, a man who learned warfare in the blood-soaked fields of Spain and Portugal. He has never known defeat. His officers are veterans of Salamanca, Vittoria, and Waterloo. His soldiers are the same redcoats who marched into France and brought the greatest military genius of the age to his knees. They look at America and see another easy conquest, another jewel for the crown. They are wrong. Standing between the British Empire and the Mississippi is a man who seems pulled from the pages of mythology rather than military registers. Major General Andrew Jackson is gaunt, permanently ill from old wounds, weighing barely 140 pounds, his body a map of violence. A British officer's saber scarred his face when he was 13 for refusing to polish boots. He carries bullets in his chest from 2 separate duels, lead that will never be removed, metal that grinds against bone with every breath. He has fought Creek warriors in hand-to-hand combat. He has executed mutineers with his own hands. He is not a trained military strategist. He has no formal education in warfare. What he possesses instead is something far more dangerous, an absolute, unshakable refusal to lose. When his officers suggest retreat might be prudent, he tells them he will fight the British if he has to do it alone. When the governor of Louisiana whispers doubts, Jackson reportedly says he will shoot any man who speaks of surrender. His eyes, according to those who meet them, burn with something between madness and divine certainty. Jackson's army is a contradiction that should not exist. He commands barely 7,000 men, and calling them an army is generous. There are regular U.S. Army troops, yes, but only about 800 of them. There are Tennessee and Kentucky militiamen who arrived expecting a short adventure and found themselves in the fight of their lives. There are free men of color from New Orleans, organized into battalions and armed against the protests of some white citizens who fear what it means to give black men guns and training. There are Choctaw warriors who have chosen the American side in this white man's war.
there is a battalion of pirates, literal criminals led by Jean Lafitte, offered pardons in exchange for fighting. These are the defenders of New Orleans, farmers, merchants, Indians, former slaves, and outlaws. The British will outnumber them. The British will have better weapons, better training, better everything. None of that matters to Andrew Jackson.
The British arrive at Lake Bourne in mid-December with a fleet so vast it seems to cover the water itself. 40 warships, thousands of soldiers packed into transports, artillery pieces that could level fortifications. The plan is textbook British military doctrine. Land a large force, advance in disciplined formations, overwhelm the defenders with superior firepower and cold steel, plant the Union Jack over another conquered city. Pakenham is so confident he brings his dress uniform for the victory celebration. Some officers pack formal dinnerware, planning elaborate meals once New Orleans falls. They discuss which buildings will make suitable headquarters. They argue over who will get which plantations as rewards. In their minds, the battle is already won. All that remains is the formality of fighting it. Jackson, however, does not cooperate with their schedule. When British advance forces land on December 23rd, expecting to camp unmolested and prepare for a proper assault, Jackson hits them that very night. It is not a battle in any conventional sense. It is chaos in darkness. American forces appearing out of the swamp mist, firing, vanishing, reappearing somewhere else. The British, exhausted from rowing through freezing water all day, stumble into combat without clear lines or orders. The night battle accomplishes something crucial. It tells the British that this will not be easy. It buys Jackson time, and time is what he needs to build his masterpiece. Between the British landing site and New Orleans runs a canal, now dry, called the Rodriguez Canal. It is not impressive, just a ditch really, running from the Mississippi River to a cypress swamp. But Jackson sees what it can become. He orders his men to dig, to pile the earth on the New Orleans side, to create a rampart. Then he does something unexpected. He orders cotton bales brought from the warehouses of New Orleans, hundreds of them, and places them along the earthworks. The cotton, compressed and thick, will absorb musket balls. It will give his men cover. Then he positions his artillery, 8 batteries with everything from 6-pounders to naval guns borrowed from ships. The line is not elegant. It is rough, improvised, built in days rather than months, but it faces the only feasible approach to the city, and it gives Jackson's untrained soldiers something they desperately need: protection. If you are still watching, do me a favor, hit that like button right now, because what happens next is going to change how you think about courage, about discipline, about what ordinary people can do when everything is on the line. And make sure you are subscribed, because the story of how this battle unfolds, decision by decision, shot by shot, is something you will not want to miss. The British spend the last week of December probing Jackson's line, testing its strength, looking for weaknesses. They find none that matter. Pakenham grows frustrated. His superiors expect results. His men are dying slowly from disease and cold in the swampy camps. Food is running low. The element of surprise is gone. He needs a decisive victory, and he needs it now. His staff develops a plan, a frontal assault in overwhelming force. They will advance in 3 columns. The first, under Major General Samuel Gibbs, will strike the American left. The second, under Major General John Keane, will hit the center. The third will cross the Mississippi and attack an American position on the far bank, then turn captured artillery on Jackson's main line from behind. It is ambitious, it requires precise timing, and it depends on British soldiers doing what they have always done, marching into fire without breaking, closing with the enemy, and winning through sheer discipline and steel. January 8, 1815 dawns cold and wrapped in fog so thick you cannot see 30 yards ahead. Behind the earthworks, American soldiers huddle in silence, checking their rifles, saying prayers, thinking of homes they may never see again.
Many of them have never been in a real battle. They know the British are coming. They can hear sounds through the mist, officers shouting commands, equipment clanking, thousands of feet moving through mud. The sounds grow louder, closer. Some of the militiamen shake uncontrollably, not from cold, but from fear. Jackson moves along the line, speaking quietly to his men. He does not give them flowery speeches. He tells them to aim low, to fire when they can see the enemy clearly, to hold their ground. His presence, that skeletal figure with burning eyes, somehow steadies them. At dawn, the British begin their advance. Drums beat the rhythm. 5,400 soldiers in tight formation, shoulder to shoulder, muskets with bayonets fixed, moving forward like a red machine. They are Peninsular War veterans who marched through French artillery and lived. They have been told the American militia will run at the sight of them. They believe it. Why would they not? The Americans are untrained rabble. This is the British Army. This is what they do. The fog begins to lift. Through the thinning mist, the Americans see them coming. Rank after rank of redcoats in perfect formation, a wall of men in steel advancing across the open field. It is terrifying and beautiful at the same moment, this display of military precision. The British soldiers step over ditches, dress their lines without breaking stride, come on an eerie silence except for the drums. 400 yards, 300, 200. Jackson gives no order to fire yet. Let them come closer. Let every shot count. The American artillery crews stand ready, fingers on lanyards. The riflemen aim down their long barrels, watching the mass of red grow larger. You can see faces now, expressions. The British are still confident, still certain this will end as it always has. 150 yards, 100. Jackson's artillery commander looks at him. Jackson nods. The American guns roar. What happens in the next 20 minutes will be studied by military historians for 200 years. The American artillery, firing from protected positions, tears into the British ranks with devastating accuracy. Cannonballs rip lanes through the formations, killing 6, 8, 10 men with a single shot. The British close ranks and keep coming, stepping over their own dead, exactly as they were trained. At 75 yards, Jackson's infantry opens fire. 7,000 muskets and rifles discharge in a rolling thunder that sounds like the world ending. The British line staggers. Men fall in clumps, in whole sections. Officers on horseback are shot from their saddles. The British keep coming. They always keep coming. That is what makes them British. But something is different this time. The Americans do not break. They do not run. They reload and fire again and again and again. The Kentuckians and Tennesseans, men who hunt for survival, who can put a bullet through a squirrel's eye at 100 yards, are not wasting shots. They aim for officers, for anyone who looks important, for the men trying to rally the formations. The pirates and smugglers under Lafitte, who know violence intimately, fire with cold precision. The free men of color, fighting to prove their worth, to earn their place in this nation, fight with desperate courage. Behind the cotton bales and earthworks, the militia who were supposed to flee are instead creating a killing field unlike anything the British have experienced. General Gibbs, leading the main assault column, is hit multiple times and falls dying. General Keane is wounded and carried from the field. The British soldiers, brave beyond description, continue advancing into the wall of lead. They reach the ditch in front of the American rampart and discover nobody brought ladders. The scaling ladders were supposed to be carried by a detachment that got lost in the fog. Without them, the British are trapped in the ditch, trying to climb muddy walls under point-blank fire. It is not a battle anymore. It is slaughter. Major General Pakenham, seeing his attack collapsing, rides forward personally to rally his men. It is what officers do. It is what honor demands. He is shot in the knee. He stays mounted, shouting orders. He is shot through the arm. Still he remains, trying to restore the advance. Then a grape shot tears into his spine. He falls from his horse and dies within minutes. his body carried from the field in a hogshead barrel filled with rum to preserve it for the journey home. Command devolves to General John Lambert, who looks at the carnage and makes the only sane decision. He orders a retreat. The British fall back, leaving the field covered with their dead and wounded. The main assault has lasted barely 25 minutes. In that span of time, the British Army has lost over 2,000 men, 700 dead, 1,400 wounded, 500 captured or missing. The dead are so numerous that soldiers will later describe walking across the field and never touching ground, only bodies. American casualties number 13 dead and 39 wounded. It is not a battle. It is an execution, a mismatch so complete it seems impossible. The British troops, stunned and broken, retreat to their ships. The invasion is over. But here is what makes this moment transcendent beyond the mere accounting of casualties. Those American defenders, those farmers and pirates and free black soldiers, did not just win a battle. They proved something that rippled through the American psyche for generations. They proved that ordinary people fighting for their homes could stand against the greatest military power on earth and win. They proved that discipline could be learned, that courage was not the exclusive property of professional soldiers, that when free men choose to fight, they are the equal of anyone.
If you are finding this story as powerful as I am in telling it, leave a comment below. Tell me what you think made the difference at New Orleans. Was it Jackson's leadership, the defensive position, the motivation of the defenders? Or was it something else, something harder to quantify? I read every comment, and I want to hear your thoughts. The news of the victory reaches Washington weeks later, almost simultaneously with news of the peace treaty. America erupts in celebration. Church bells ring in every town. Bonfires light the night sky. Andrew Jackson becomes a national hero overnight, a living legend, the man who defeated the British Empire. His face will appear on currency. Statues will be erected. He will become president. The Battle of New Orleans will be taught to school children as proof that Americans can accomplish anything if they stand together. Songs will be written. Paintings will be commissioned. The reality of the battle, all its complexity and moral ambiguity, will be smoothed into mythology. But there are other stories from New Orleans that do not fit neatly into patriotic narratives. The free men of color who fought with distinction will find their service forgotten within a generation, their rights not expanded but restricted. Within 15 years, Louisiana will pass laws stripping free black men of the very freedoms they fought to defend. The Choctaw warriors who sided with America will watch as the nation they helped save turns on them, driving them from their ancestral lands in the Trail of Tears. John Lafitte and his pirates, pardoned for their service, will return to smuggling and piracy within months. The victory at New Orleans, so complete and glorious in the moment, does not solve America's fundamental contradictions. It only postpones their reckoning. And what of the British dead? They are buried in mass graves near the battlefield, far from home, their bones resting in Louisiana soil. Most were young men, teenagers and 20-somethings who joined the army for steady pay and adventure. They were not evil, they were not monsters, they were soldiers, following orders, fighting for king and country, doing their duty as they understood it. Their deaths bought Britain nothing. The war was already over, the peace was already signed. They died for a battle that had no strategic purpose, in a war both sides had already agreed to end. History would barely remember their names. Pakenham would get a monument. The common soldiers would get nothing but anonymous graves and a footnote. Jackson, despite his moment of glory, carries his own shadows forward. The same ruthless determination that won New Orleans will later drive him to commit what many considered genocide against Native American tribes. The same iron will that held the line against British regulars will be turned against the Cherokee, the Creek, the Seminole, forcing them westward on death marches. The hero of New Orleans will become the architect of the Trail of Tears. History is not simple. People are not simple. The same qualities that make someone a great defender can make them a terrible oppressor. Jackson is both the savior of New Orleans and the destroyer of nations. He contains multitudes,
and they are not all noble. The battlefield itself eventually becomes part of the expanding city, then a park, then a historical site. Plaques mark where the British advanced and died. Tour guides tell the story to visitors, though the version they tell is usually sanitized, heroic, simple. American courage defeats British tyranny. Democracy triumphs over empire. The end. But if you stand there quietly, if you imagine the fog and the drums and the screams, you realize it was never that simple. It was terrified young men from Tennessee wondering if they would ever see their families again. It was British soldiers marching into fire because orders are orders and duty is duty. It was enslaved people watching free black men fight for a nation that enslaves them. It was Native Americans helping settlers who will soon take their land. It was complexity and contradiction wrapped in gunpowder and blood. Military historians still debate what went wrong for the British. Some blame Pakenham's impatience, his need for a quick victory overriding tactical caution. Some point to the failure to bring scaling ladders, a logistical breakdown that proved fatal. Some argue the frontal assault was doomed from the start, that no amount of courage could overcome the advantage Jackson's position gave him. Others suggest the British simply underestimated their opponents, believing American militia would break and run as they had in previous battles. All of these factors played a role, but perhaps the simplest explanation is also the truest. The Americans had more to lose. They were defending their homes, their families, their futures. The British were fighting for orders, for pride, for conquest. Motivation matters. It always has.
The rifles the Americans used also made a difference that is sometimes overlooked. British soldiers carried smooth-bore muskets, accurate to maybe 50 yards on a good day. American frontiersmen carried long rifles, accurate to 200 yards or more in skilled hands. When you can kill a man at twice the distance he can kill you, the mathematics of battle change fundamentally. The British tactics, which worked against French armies armed with similar smoothbores, became suicidal against an enemy with rifles. It was not just courage and position, it was technology meeting tactics in a fatal mismatch. Jean Lafitte, the pirate who brought his men and his knowledge of the bayous to Jackson's aid, is one of the more fascinating side characters in this story. By all accounts, he was a smuggler, a criminal, someone who made his living breaking laws. The British had offered him a small fortune and a commission to fight for them. He chose America instead, reportedly out of genuine patriotism, though cynics suggest he simply thought American victory was more likely and wanted to be on the winning side. Regardless of his motives, his men fought bravely, and his artillery expertise proved invaluable. After the battle, Jackson publicly thanked him, the government pardoned him, and within a short time, Lafitte was back to smuggling. He eventually left Louisiana, disappeared into the Gulf of Mexico, and died in obscurity somewhere around 1823. Even in death, he remained a mystery, buried in an unmarked grave if he was buried at all. The Treaty of Ghent, which officially ended the War of 1812, did not address any of the issues that started the war. Britain did not stop impressing American sailors into the Royal Navy because the Napoleonic Wars ended and they no longer needed to. America did not gain territory. The Canadian border remained unchanged. Native American rights, which both sides claimed to champion, were ignored entirely. Historians often call the War of 1812 a pointless conflict, a war where thousands died and nothing changed. Yet it changed America profoundly, not through what it accomplished, but through what it revealed. The Battle of New Orleans became the defining moment, proof that America could defend itself, that it was a real nation capable of standing against empires. It was psychologically essential, even if strategically meaningless. One wonders what the men who fought at New Orleans would think if they could see how their battle is remembered. Would the British soldiers feel honored that their sacrifice is acknowledged, or bitter that they died for nothing? Would the Americans feel pride at their victory, or sorrow at what their nation became? Would the free black soldiers feel vindicated that their courage is slowly, belatedly being recognized, or rage that it took so long? Would the native warriors feel anything but betrayal? History is not something that happens and then stops. It echoes, it reverberates. The choices made that foggy morning in January 1815
created ripples that are still washing over us 200 years later. Jackson's character is worth examining more closely because he is so central to not just the battle, but to American mythology. He was not a thoughtful man. He did not spend hours pondering philosophy or strategy. He acted on instinct and will, and when he decided something, he became immovable. This made him incredibly effective in moments of crisis, when hesitation means death and decisiveness wins battles. It also made him capable of extraordinary cruelty when he decided someone was an enemy. He could order executions without visible emotion. He could make decisions that condemned thousands to suffering without apparent regret. He was not conflicted. He saw the world in absolute terms: friend or enemy, right or wrong, win or die. This moral simplicity, which served him so well at New Orleans, became catastrophic when applied to peacetime governance. The ordinary soldiers who held the line deserve more attention than they usually receive. History remembers Jackson. It sometimes remembers Pakenham. It rarely remembers Private John Smith from Kentucky, who had never fired a gun in anger before January 8th, who was shaking so badly he could barely load his rifle, who fired into that mass of redcoats because the men beside him were firing, and he did not want to be the one who ran. He survived the battle, went home to his farm, lived another 40 years, and died without anyone writing his story. Multiply him by 7,000, and you get closer to the truth of what happened in New Orleans. It was not one great man. It was thousands of ordinary men doing something extraordinary because they had no choice.
The British soldiers, too, deserve more than being remembered as faceless enemies. They were professionals doing their job. They marched into that killing field because that is what soldiers do when ordered. The courage it takes to walk forward while bullets tear through the men beside you, to maintain formation while your officers fall, to keep going when every instinct screams to run, is profound. They were not cowards. They were not incompetent. They were victims of bad leadership, impossible orders, and a fight they should never have been asked to make. Their bodies piled up in front of the American ramparts not because they lacked courage, but because courage alone cannot overcome mathematics. There is a moral question embedded in the Battle of New Orleans that is rarely addressed directly. What were they even fighting for at that point? The war was over. Peace was signed. If communication had been faster, if ships could move at modern speeds, those men would never have fought at all. They would have stood down, packed up, gone home. Instead, they killed each other for a cause that had already ended. It is one of the great tragic ironies of history. The bloodiest battle of the War of 1812 occurred after the war was officially over, fought by men who had no idea their governments had already made peace. What does that say about war, about communication, about the fundamental absurdity of organized violence? As the years passed and the Battle of New Orleans faded from living memory into history, the story changed. It became cleaner, simpler, more heroic. The complexities disappeared. The moral ambiguities were smoothed away. It became a story about American courage and British tyranny, about democracy defeating imperialism, about the little guy winning through pluck and determination. This is what mythology does. It takes messy reality and turns it into narrative, and narrative requires clarity that reality rarely provides. The truth is that New Orleans was many things: a stunning tactical victory, pointless waste of life, a defining moment in American identity, a footnote in British military history, a betrayal of those who fought and were then forgotten. It was all of these things simultaneously, and our job as students of history is to hold all of those truths together without simplifying them into comfortable stories. So what do we take from the Battle of New Orleans now, more than 2 centuries later? Perhaps this: that ordinary people are capable of extraordinary things when the stakes are clear and the cause feels just. That leadership matters, that position matters, that technology matters, but ultimately, battles are won by individuals making the choice to stand when running would be easier. That victory and justice are not the same thing. That winning a battle does not make you right. That heroes in one context can be villains in another. That courage is complicated.
that soldiers on both sides usually have more in common with each other than the leaders who order them to fight, that wars start for complicated reasons and end for different reasons, and the people who die in between rarely get to know whether their sacrifice mattered. The Battle of New Orleans mattered because the people who fought it believed it mattered. They poured everything they had into those muddy ramparts and that fog-shrouded field. They bled and died and killed, believing something important hung in the balance. Whether they were right or wrong, whether the war itself made sense, whether history would remember them fairly, none of that changes the reality of what they experienced in those moments. The fear was real, the courage was real, the pain was real. That is what we owe them, to remember it as real, as human, as something more than just dates and casualty figures. Andrew Jackson died in 1845, 30 years after his greatest military victory, still a controversial figure even then. His presidency had been divisive as his military career was celebrated. He had made enemies as readily as he made decisions. He had changed America, for better and worse, in ways that still echo. When he died, some mourned a great American patriot. Others quietly celebrated the passing of a tyrant. Both were right. He was both. The Battle of New Orleans was his moment of pure triumph, the one point in his complicated life where almost everyone agreed he had done the right thing in the right way. Even that clarity, though, depends on which story of the battle you choose to tell. If you are still here, if you have stayed with this story all the way through, thank you. Understanding history, really understanding it, means sitting with complexity and ambiguity and contradictions that do not resolve. It means honoring the courage of people we disagree with and questioning the motives of people we admire. It means remembering that every historical event was, in its moment, the present, full of uncertainty and fear, and people making impossible choices with incomplete information. The Battle of New Orleans was not inevitable. It could have gone differently at a dozen different points. The Americans could have broken and run. The British could have found a better approach. Jackson could have made a fatal mistake. Any of those things might have changed everything. So I will leave you with this question, one that I hope you will turn over in your mind and maybe share your thoughts on in the comments. If you had been there, in the cold fog of that January morning, hearing the drums and knowing what was coming, which side of that rampart would you want to be on? Not which side was right or wrong in some abstract moral sense, but where would you want to stand? Behind the earthworks with the Americans, defending your home but facing the finest soldiers in the world? Or in the British ranks, advancing with your brothers in arms into that wall of fire, doing your duty even knowing it might be futile? Neither answer is wrong. Both require more courage than most of us will ever need to show. That is the reality of war. That is what we owe to memory. That is the true lesson of New Orleans, that history is written by human beings in blood and mud and terror, and they all deserve to be remembered as human beings, not as symbols or myths or simple lessons. They deserve to be remembered as they were, afraid and brave, wrong and right, ordinary and extraordinary, all at once.